Ladies and gents, welcome to the Shroom Live podcast. Another evening, another guest. Tonight we have Steve Collopy, Scallops from the Northern Beaches, and he's going to be talking about Kingfish, chasing them on lures, possibly even some of his tactics about baits as well. He fishes for them off the ocean rocks, and he's got a vast amount of experience relating to this area. He's been fishing for about 28 years in the Sydney area, mostly off rocks and off the beach as well. So he does a bit of beach fishing for jewfish as well, which we'll probably get him on at some future stage if you want to hear about that podcast. But tonight we're talking Kingfish. So let's introduce him, another fishing addict. How you going, Steve?
Yeah, good, mate. Thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure. So it's something that I like to talk about, and that's Kingfish, especially on lures. But, you know, I do a bit of Kingfish on the boat as well using baits. It's just one of those things. It just gets the adrenaline pumping sometimes, just having such a powerful, specimen on the end of the line. So let's just get straight into it and talk about, what about this species is, intriguing to you and why you've spent so much time chasing them off the rocks.
Mate, probably just echoing what you said in the sense that they're just powerful fish. Like, not only are they powerful, but they're also really tricky. I don't think I know really anyone who has them down pat in terms of, let's say a formula to catch them. Some days you'll have live baits out there, but they only want plastics. Some baits you go using plastics and they're taking live baits. And, it's kind of that, I guess it's that kind of trying to outsmart them, but also feel their raw power as well. And they're also delicious. So that's three good things, which is, pretty self-explanatory, I guess.
Yeah, I think what you've just mentioned there, it's very interesting. They have all the tools to make it difficult to overcome as an adversary, so to speak. Targeting these fish, they're powerful, they're very picky. There's reasons to chase them. Like you said, they're good sport fish, they're good on the chew. Of course, that's another reason why people like to target them. And because of their nature, their finicky nature, and their ability to just have a different sort of demeanor every time you come across them, you never quite know what sort of presentation or approach is going to be the one for that particular session. And I guess that's why you've been chasing them for so long.
100%. And that's where that's that kind of intrigue that you have in your head where you're like, you think one day, okay, I've caught a couple on this kind of technique, I'm going to keep doing it. Nothing. And you're like, back to the drawing board. So it's just a never ending cycle of trying to outsmart them. But, I swear that fish kind of know how much you spend on fishing gear and how much time you spend on trying to catch them. And they just know that. So they're just going to be like, you know what? I'm just not going to, bait today. I'm just going to do what I want.
I can definitely give you a story on, just their finicky nature. I mean, first of all, like you said, as anglers, because of the attributes that they possess, their power, their strength, their endurance, you have to get literally high quality gear, which often, translates to a high cost of equipment, and they'll still bust that up at, these sorts of things happen.
100%.
Yeah, and just getting back to the point that I was making about, their finicky nature, they can be taking big baits, liveys, for example, or entire squid, or large poppers, large surface stick baits.
Yep.
Today, you come back tomorrow at the next tide change and suddenly they've decided that, I don't want that anymore. I want those jelly prawns. I want those little bait fish in that little ball over there. They'll have a nibble, and then maybe half an hour later they'll come back around and then they're not interested anymore.
100%. And it's so frustrating. Like, oh man, it's just like they wake up. I don't know if they sleep, they probably do. But they wake up and just, make the decision then and there, and it completely just, you're not going to know that, and it just ruins your day sometimes. But sometimes it makes your day. But similar, we had whoa, we're on a boat this time, but fishing in pit water, and like we had every bait for them: live yakkers, live squid, and we'll just sort of like we kind of find some wrecks around there, and back at this is a while back now, and would anchor up and just sort of sit our fresh baits there and wait for them to come because they just do circles around the moorings and stuff. We had about
Yep.
6 of them, probably like, well, let's say about 80 or so centimeters, just cruising around the boat, not wanting a bar of anything, and they decided to eat the bread we're throwing in for yakkers. And you're like,
Wow.
really? Really? So you thought, you know what, let's just put a bit of bread on. No, didn't want that.
That's like a 1 in 100 chance of finding them in that sort of mood.
Yep.
Going for bread out of all things that they could be attuned to at that moment. They're going for something that doesn't even have any protein, which sort of boggles the mind given that they're such a high up, the food chain predator. I mean, in terms of fish,
I know, right?
in terms of fish, they got to be right up there at the very tippy top, excluding sharks, which would obviously sit, or if you want to think about humans at the very top. Let's just shout out to all humans. We're we're the apex predator,
That's
but
it.
literally,
yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
But like they've had how many millions of years of evolution to be, this, like they're almost like out of a mold of a perfect predator.
Yeah, I just want to ask you, for those that, they're listening in from different, states.
Yeah.
Pit water. How would you describe pit water in a few sentences about what sort of waterway that is?
Yeah, so it's part of Broken Bay, which gets a bit of hype from the kind of jewfish fishing around the Hawkesbury and things like that. So it's an arm of that waterway. It's probably about, let's say, 20 k's north of the Sydney CBD. It's a very interesting estuary system because it's deep, but it also has very minimal water flow. So a lot of estuaries around, a lot of other estuaries have the solid water flow or tidal flow. Pittwater doesn't have that. It's very deep, and it's just a little bit different in that sense. So, but in a nutshell, it's an estuary system with a lot of different areas to fish, and you've got the Hawkesbury if you go out of Pittwater, if you turn left, you got the Hawkesbury Central Coast and that kind of Brisbane waters, which is a relatively famous area for jewfish. And then if you turn right, you're offshore.
Yeah, and that's I think there's like an island there, Lion Island or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, so Lion Island's there. That's a turtle reserve.
Right.
Which is something that you're not allowed on it. If you go on it, apparently they can shoot upon you or something. There's a sign that tells you that you get shot at, but it's kind of
Interesting.
like, right. There's a Navy base inside Pittwater. And back in the day, they used to fire torpedoes from the base to the deepest part, which we call the deep hole. So, that was kind of cool. But besides that, I mean, there's a few little relics around, like some tank stoppers and stuff from World War II. It's just an estuary system with some pretty cool outlets that you can find fish.
I think I've done a bit of trawling around Lion Island. Luckily, nobody tried to shoot me.
Yeah.
Caught a salmon, but maybe they weren't interested in me catching salmon out that way.
Nah, I think they're more interested if you set up camp on Lion Island.
Yeah. Now, obviously nearby we're talking about the beaches and and the rocks, which is, I mean, I'd still take anything relating to Pittwater at this stage in our discussion. But like off the rocks, it's a completely different type of ball game now, and especially off the beaches.
Yeah, so 100%.
How would you describe the sort of, the rocky terrain around that sort of region? And also, it's obviously going to extend all the way up and down the coast as well. It's, it's a coastal sort of, habitat for these fish.
Yeah. So the rock sort of platforms are relatively known, some spots. So, a simple, like if you do a Google search around, if you type in, Whale Beach, rock fishing or things like that, you'll see a fair bit of sort of, let's say, content around that. And then there's a sort of a local guru. I don't know if anyone's heard of him, Alex Bellissimo, who's been fishing the rocks here. He's like, he just knows it like the back of his hand, and he's on. He's got a content. He's got a lot of content through his sort of charter business, and through Daiwa. So yeah, he kind of fishes down a bit further south, like around Bluefish, which is just off Manly, and Curl and a few other places there. So look, there's plenty of rock platforms to fish. What the platforms here are compared to say the North Coast is that they're quite how'd you put it, they're not as, the North Coast has a completely different terrain.
Yep.
And then different species and stuff like that. Down the South Coast is a little bit different too. So around here you're looking at sort of the beaches here too aren't as long. So the North Coast is really long beaches and smaller headlands and things like that. So yeah, it's completely different. But here you've got your beach, headland, and in between those beaches, you'll find some really good places to fish. Which it is Sydney, so most of it's relatively known. But in a nutshell, every patch of headland will have fish, whether or not it's big fish or small fish. Most of the time there will be fish there.
That would be up to the angler to experiment with and, discover some of these, spots and places. Obviously here, I think just understanding what sort of terrain and the possibility that as long as you're within that sort of general structure, you're in with the shot with, the techniques that, that we're going to be employing in this podcast, or at least talking about employing. See, I'm already thinking about doing it right here in front of the microphone, fishing.
Well, that's it. That's it. And that's the thing, like, the beauty of it is you can employ different things to find the fish. Like, to be honest, most of the time, like a lot of our kingfish catches have been because we haven't been targeting them. They are a very curious fish. So, we might be burleying for just like trevally or something like that, just as, middle of winter, trying to catch some winter fish. A kingfish will just come through the burley or something like that. So, they're very fickle. But yeah, when you get into it, it gets pretty fun. But again, it is rock fishing, so I do got to stress that if you're not that great of a swimmer or if you don't quite know what you're doing, just wear a life jacket, be safe, and that kind of stuff. But I guess in two, when it comes to fishing off the rocks, even the smallest king will give you a lot of grief because you're basically fishing in their terrain. They know exactly where the rock shelf is. They know exactly where they can cut you off. They know exactly where the bommies are. They know what they're doing. And the moment you hook one, you'll know. I reckon you'd probably have make or break within the first 5 seconds. If it's gone, it's gone. But you can kind of manipulate them. But yeah, I think that's one of the biggest kind of things about rock fishing for them.
I want to talk more about the process of, fishing for them off the rocks. But let's just quickly introduce some of maybe the lures or the baits and maybe even rigs that you reckon or that you use yourself over the many years that you've chased them.
Yeah, look, so if you're talking about bait, they really are. Look, for the bigger fish, you're definitely looking at live bait. Live bait's the key for your bigger kings. Generally fish them on a float. If you're fishing an area that's quite busy, it can be frustrating because the live bait can sort of crisscross and go into people's lines and things like that. But if you're fishing dead baits, you're fishing them with very minimal kind of sinkers and things like that, just like a floater floating them down like you do fishing a boat. But I guess in a nutshell, like with anything, fresh is best. So fresh squid strips, fresh things like that. But then that being said, I've caught them on prawn. I've caught them on, pilchard strips and things like that. So it just comes down to, what they're feeding on the day. But again, fresh is best. So yeah, if you want to employ baits, that's kind of, I'll break it down. So with baits.
So live is definitely the number one.
Pretty much.
And then obviously fresh bait after that. Let's talk about liveys.
Yeah.
Liveys, what sort of species?
Look,
Like yakkers and...
Yeah, yakkers 100%. The reason is that they're hardy. If you're using a bonito, it's going to die within about 5 seconds because they need a high oxygen content. So if they're like on your float bobbing around, they're not going to get enough water float. They're going to die pretty quick. Slimies are similar unless you've got them going out in a balloon or something. But yeah, yakkers are hardy. They're tough. They're easy to come by. And generally, on the ocean rocks, if a kingy comes past a live yakka, they're not going to sort of sniff it away. They'll generally have a go. Now, that being said, that's not guaranteed, but you've got a better chance of, tempting one with live yakkas than anything else. So that's your sort of go-to with liveys. You can use a live garfish, but again, they're not that tough. They're going to, a few kicks into them, they could die. But a dead garfish will work quite well too. So, that's probably my best recommendation is definitely stick with live yakkers.
I think like with a live yakka situation, I always have discussions about this. Everyone's always asking me what's the best bait for them. I think inshore maybe a different story, but off the rocks, maybe offshore as well, yakkers seems to be king.
Yeah, that's what's there. Yeah. And that's the relative, that's the sort of local food source. And most of the time the fish, that's what they're hunting for. Yeah.
Would you locally source them there? Or would you?
Some places, some rock shelves, though, Whale Beach in particular around there, you can catch them at your feet. If you are catching yakkers, I generally use one of those, what are they called? Sabiki rigs.
Sabiki, yep.
So you can burley them up like some yakkers and stuff at your feet, especially if it's calm. Chuck your sabiki rig in there, give it a few jigs, and then you can catch them from there. You can catch them. I mean, the hard way is to catch your yakkers in the estuary. They're much easier to catch, but what I mean by hard is getting them to the location. If you're fishing a rock shelf that's a good 2 Ks from your car, you're carrying a good 10-litre bucket of water. It's not very practical.
Yeah, that's not going to happen.
Yeah, exactly. So, you kind of want to get them at your feet, but if that doesn't work, you can catch them from,
Yeah, that's good to know. Like as an option for someone that wanted to do this with baits. Yeah. Just your general sabiki jig that you can just buy anywhere, and burley them up just like how you would inshore, maybe off a wharf or off a boat when you're fishing the river, and you could still succeed in getting a few, and that might be all you need. Obviously, you don't need 50 yakkers. You
only need 3 or 4.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like these... Oh, sorry to cut you off. Sorry. Carry on.
No, keep going. No, you go first.
I was going to say, especially out that way where you can just literally catch them as you need them, there's no need to, stock up. I said 50 as an exaggeration. Obviously, bag limits, you can't even approach 50 these days.
No. So, if you wanted to catch 50, I'm not going to stop you, but...
Yeah, make sure it's between at least 3 people.
Yeah, exactly. So
I think it's 20. The limit's 20, but yeah, don't quote me on that. Just to make sure that we're abiding by all rules and regulations here.
This is not legal advice here, so please don't quote us in a court of law. But but with the sabiki jigs as well, like you mentioned, in a boat or something, most of the time catching yakkers, you're just going to use a little hook, no sink or whatever. You can't really do that off the rocks. It's just going to get washed around too much. So that's where the sabiki jig comes into its own, that you can cast it out there and you've got direct contact with it. So, bait catching's a little easier. And for those out there who might want to give it a go, but with dead baits, like dead yakkers or something like that, look, it's okay. It's just that dead baits can be subject to pickers, and there are lots of pickers off the rocks, like sweep, leather jackets, and things like that can really destroy your baits. So, whereas live baits are a bit more hardier to that. So that's just a little tip there if you're going to give it a go.
I think what you mentioned there was something we all could understand, and that's pickers when it comes to chasing kingfish. Jackets and sweep and angelfish, anything which is hitting that squid inshore, and obviously if you have a dead yakka, that's going to happen as well.
Yeah.
So basically, if you have a big live bait, that's going to prevent most situations of having it pecked to pieces, like
Yeah,
totally
100%.
obliterated.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It makes a huge difference. But then on the topic of live baits, though, I do know some people who use Kingfish for live baits, for bigger Kingfish, um, which is pretty full on. So, but these are the kind of land-based guys who target marlin off the rocks and things like that, and big cobia. But yeah, they've told me stories where they get like a 70 centimeter king, put the hook in the back of it, and throw it back out, which is pretty insane.
That is insane. I didn't even know people did that, and I'm just trying to picture what sort of gear and what sort of space you need to control a live bait kingfish.
Yeah, yeah, it's full on. It's full on. Like, I mean, that being said, though, when we're in New Zealand fishing for kings off the rocks, there, like they use 2 foot long, salmon as bait,
Yeah.
which is yeah, it.
It does boggle the mind thinking about what that's for, knowing what it's for, how it could even be possible. But a kingfish, I'm thinking this is the first time that your livey is likely to smoke you.
Pretty much. Yeah. Because, like, I've talked to them and I'm like, mate, I'd be stoked for the 70 centimeter king. He's like, no, mate, just pop a 7-0 through the top of his neck and just throw it back out. I'm like, you know what? That's crazy. But then, photo evidence is there. The kings they catch are pretty big. This
Yeah,
is like down the south coast way, like Jarvis Bay and stuff. So, yeah, they're insane.
yeah. Now we'll move on to lures in a second, but how would you rig them? Just a hook through the top of the head?
Yeah, most of the time through the top of the head. It's a pretty sturdy spot. The reason you want to put it there is that it also gives a bit of kind of like how to say strength or strength would be the right word. Yeah, strength. So say you put the hook just through the tail or through the nose, you're casting it out quite a bit. So if you're casting it out and retrieving it, it might rip off and you might lose it. Whereas when you put it through the back of the head, it's just a bit more meat that can secure the hook in there. So that's the reason why we put it there.
You get a bit more purchase as you can sort of embed it a bit deeper.
Exactly. And they stay alive and there's no and generally a king will kind of hit it from the head end as well. Which, makes sense. But yeah, we generally, there's no science to it. It's just the fact that the hook will stay in there.
What size hook and how much leader?
I don't use hooks that are too big, so probably between a 6.0 and an 8.0. Depending if there's sharks around, I might push it a bit bigger. But yeah, around that size, I generally, some guys use those mustad hoodlum hooks, but I find that the gauge on it is so thick that you can kind of miss hookups at times, and I just don't think it needs to be that thick because you are applying pressure on the fish, but it's nowhere near as much as you would be, say, jigging them for something. So, probably I use the Mustad big gun hooks, just a bit of a thinner gauge. And then also I use the Mustad tarpon hooks. The reason I use the tarpon hooks is that they've got a bit of a longer shank. And if there are sharks around or toothy critters, you've got a little bit of a chance to land them without using a, trace or something. So, and then in terms of leader, I generally run 80-pound fluorocarbon, and then that goes to a float, and then my main line. Main line for bait's always mono, so 15 kilo mono. And the reason for that again is just because it's tough. It can handle the kinks on the rocks and things like that, whereas a braid can't really handle it that well. And yeah, it's probably
Yeah. And what about just in general the sort of rod and reel?
Oh, look, you can use any kind of rod and reel. Or not any kind of rod and reel, sorry, I'll take that back. You can use any kind of beach fishing rod and reel that's generally rated to about 10 kilos. With this kind of fishing, you don't need to go too extreme. You don't need to get anything specific as such because it's not really something that you can do. Well, you can do it all the time, but you're not going to be, you know, it's not something where you're like yourself when you're lure fishing all the time. You use the same rod and reel, and you can go every day, any day. Whereas off the rocks, there's a lot of swell. The conditions don't, warrant it all the time. So you don't need to be justifying spending 900, 2,000, whatever amount of money on a rod and reel combo that's specific for kingfish because you might only use it 2-3 times a year. So you know, give or take, you're looking at I'd say starting off, if you're going to start off, just a beach rod, any kind of brand that's rated to about 10 kilos. You can go heavier. I know Penn make a pretty heavy broomstick kind of rod, but at the end of the day, you're probably not going to be putting, 20 kilos of pressure, because if you're using a 10 or 12-foot rod, 20 kilos of pressure, you're going to be falling in. So, yeah, you don't need to spend too much. So any kind of rod and reel combo, maybe from BCF or something, would be fine. But if I was going to suggest something, I'd suggest the Daiwa Beef Stick Z. It's a very good rod combo. It's a fiberglass rod, relatively cheap, lightweight. And the reason I like to suggest it is because they've got very good guides on them. A lot of the cheaper kind of fiberglass rods have really crappy guides, and they rust out and all that sort of stuff. You might drop it on a rock and the eyelet will pop out. So yeah, the Beef Stick Zs are quite good. And they're rated to about 15 kilos. One of those with maybe a 6,000 or 8,000 pen, let's say a pen Pursuit. Even one of those, they're like $80.
Yeah. It sounds like, you're not too fussy on the sorts of gear. So long as it's within the right, say line class, it's got enough power. That's it. You're not, like you said, you're not casting it, retrieving it. You're not feeling it in the shoulder. Even if it's a heavier combo, it's not going to make that much difference. You get one lob out of the bait, you might check it again 20 minutes later.
Exactly. And for yourself, like the gear you use for plastics, and a lot of people out there who do like using light line fishing, you do need to spend a bit of money on those high quality drags, because you're using such light line. You need to be able to control the fish. You need to be able to handle, some bigger fish and things like that. Whereas this kind of fishing, it's more of a tug of war. You just want a reel that can lock up, because you're not really, worried too much about the drags. Well, you don't need like spending heaps to make sure your drag's super smooth or anything. And you're using mono too, so the stretch will add to the kind of, I guess, release of drag. And it's a tug of war.
Yeah, I was about to say that. The fact that you're using mono, you've got that stretch to absorb all those sharp increases in pressure.
Yeah,
100%.
And,
there's not going to be much difference if you decide to go from 80 pound to 100 pound leader.
exactly,
it's not, it's not out of, it's not something that you couldn't consider an option. Now, when it comes to, say, light line fishing and you need to stick around 4 to 6 pound, you can't really go much higher. You're going to lose effectiveness and hookup rates, and things are just going to be out of balance. But it's a completely different ball game. Completely understand. I think you made a really good point there about that.
Yeah. And, the more money you spend, you're generally paying for better drag systems, lighter reels, and better strength. But you don't need to spend $1,200 on a Stella, because you're not casting it all day. You don't need to worry about, and you're off the rocks. You're going to drop it.
You're going to dunk it possibly, or get it splashed. Yeah,
exactly. You can be the most carefulest dude out there. You're going to fall in a hole and drop it. Like it just happens. So yeah, you don't need to break the bank on that kind of stuff.
What about floats? Float fishing isn't something that I do very much. Is there anything that that's worth mentioning about types of floats or what you're looking for?
No, just the generic kind of orange and white ones.
Just keep your bait above the water, basically, and you can see
pretty much. And you want to be able to see it, yeah. So I know
it's
some
not
guys,
like I guess it's not like fishing for Luderick, where a little light tap, it's got perfectly balanced and it goes under. This is Kingfish we're talking about, and sharks smashing it. Yep. They take it. You'll know that they've taken it. You don't need to. Oh, yeah. You'll see the float making like a beeline of bubbles underneath the water or something.
Yeah. No, the scariest is when it actually, so you'll have your float and it'll be sitting upright, and the scariest is when it goes up.
It starts jets, like water skiing or something.
Yeah, and it just floats up, like it's less like the pressure underneath it's just come up. It's so a fish has grabbed it and brought it up, and you just think, I probably should start winding now to set that hook, and it's just like you panic. I get super anxious when I see it, but then sometimes it's just the wave or something. But yeah, there's that, but I know some guys out there will actually spray paint their floats black, because the black actually looks much. It's more visible in the white water compared to a fluoro or something. So,
Oh,
if you are
interesting. Yep.
fishing, yeah. So if you are fishing in an area that has a bit of wash, yeah, don't be shy to spray paint them black.
Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't know that. Black. I thought when you said black, oh, it's gonna sort of blend in, but I
Yeah,
guess
no,
it
it
makes
stands right out.
sense when you've got all this white water, this foam.
Yeah.
That's pretty bright. It's reflecting a lot of sunlight, and you have a
Yep.
float which is just as bright. It sort of blends in.
Yeah, exactly. Like my Luderick floats that I've made, I paint them black.
Wow. Yeah.
I can see them
interesting,
much
yeah.
better. It depends. Like some are fluoro,
Depends
some
where
are
you
black.
depends where
Yeah.
you're fishing, of course.
Yeah, but yeah. So, but generally, you don't need to go finesse, like you said. You don't need to worry about the fish.
Yeah.
Worried about the float. So you just need something that's solid. You can see it, and you get it out there.
Yeah. What about lures? Like, obviously, you can set the bait out. You can also cast lures, and everyone knows that you can go off the rocks and start casting, say, poppers and stick baits and whatnot. What's your experiences about that, and what would you recommend?
Look, lures are great for kings. I prefer to use lures. The reason. So there's a couple of reasons. First of all, it's much more time effective. So when you work, you've got kids and things like that. You're not going to have 10 hours to sit on a rock waiting for a kingfish. So using lures, you can get out there, crack a dawn, just start casting away, and you don't have to worry about getting your bait or anything like that. So it's a good way to start and gives you a good idea on how the rocks kind of work. So that's the first thing. And the second thing, yeah, it is super fun seeing a kingfish take your lure, or just, if you're winding a metal or something like that and just having a kingfish hit it. It's, super addictive.
Yeah, I get that kick when I use a soft plastic for brim, for example, and you get that little tap and it's a fish. It's not a snag. A fish just gave you that sensation, that lightning jolt up the line, and kingfish, it's just times 1,000 more, more sensory. Like you're feeling it, you're seeing it, and if it hooks up, you'll know about it.
Definitely, and it's super addictive. Even the small ones go hard. And because sometimes you're winding that lure in super fast and something hits it, it's twice as hard as it shocks your hand. And it's good fun.
Yeah, what are some good lures to do this sort of fishing?
Look, there's plenty on the market.
I agree there.
Yeah,
Steve. There's definitely
there's heaps. To break it down, look, I'm not the biggest fan of poppers. Here in particular, I don't know if it just doesn't appeal to the fish here as such. So I generally avoid the big cut face lures.
Yeah, like rooster poppers and that sort of thing.
Exactly, those big dumbbell poppers that just for GTs and stuff. I generally don't use those. To break it down, I use Marias. I'm a big fan of Maria lures. Maria loaded, sinking and floating. So those two lures are great. They work straight out of the box. The quality of them is much higher than what you pay for. And the beauty of them is that they've got a really good action on it when you rip it through the water. Yeah. So I generally use the floating when it's calm. During the day, like during early morning, I'll use the floating stick baits. Yep. And then if that's not working, I generally go deeper and deeper. And then I'll stick with a sinking stick bait. I find those are very effective. They're around the 55 to 60 grams. And they're about, I think, they're 10 to 12 centimeters long. Don't quote me on that, but they're around that size. And that's where I kind of stick with. I don't go you can go much bigger in the sort of GT range of things, but they haven't been as effective as you're kind of around that 10 to 12 centimeter mark. Yep. And that 55 to 60 grams a good weight to get the distance. So there are those two.
Yeah, I just wanna say that, you make a good point about the size of the lure for kingfish versus, that's suitable for GTs. I've had people tell me the same. You don't want to use I mean, this is their experiences as well. It might be different for, another angler that specializes in kingfish, but you're not looking at forearm sized, poppers and stick baits. I mean, it could work. It could work. Of course, it could work, but yeah, you're probably gonna have a lot more success with a more normal sized lure here. I mean, they can still be big, but like I said, forearm size, you could make it work, but
yeah. Most of the time when you're casting those lures, you're on a boat finding GT. You can generally see them, so you can cast to them, but if you're casting all day off the rocks, you're not going to want to be casting 150 gram.
Oh yeah, that's another thing as well. I mean, this is not. I mean, I do the easy sort of fishing. I'm fishing in the rivers, the little creeks, the streams. You don't get that tired from casting lures all day. But when you're lugging out, I don't know, 110 gram or 100 gram lures, or maybe even heavier, that's surely gonna have some sort of impact on on your back at some stage, or your shoulder.
Yeah, definitely. It's even the lures, like at 50 grams, you need a break here and there, especially in the middle of summer and it's super hot. And there's that, and then also the flip side is using your lures that are slightly smaller, is that you've got chance of catching bycatch. And as you'd know, when you're lure fishing, you're casting all day, a bycatch is just keeps the adrenaline going, just keeps the sort of the enthusiasm up to keep trying to cast and cast and cast. But if you're not catching anything, you can give up pretty easily. But that sort of what I mentioned, that kind of 55 to 60 gram mark lures, they may look a bit big for a bonito or something, but a bonito will take it.
That's right. And if one does take it, it might be above average size as well.
Exactly. Yeah, you got those. You got a chance of, Mac tuna will take it. If you're super lucky, you might get a long tail, or there are some guys who I've seen catch yellowfin tuna here, like some 5 kilo jelly beans and things like that. So the bycatch is there. Yeah. I haven't been lucky enough to catch the said bub fish that I've caught a few big mac tuna, but not yellowfin or something. But So, but yeah, those two kind of lures are, I wouldn't say my go-to, but they're my two favorites. Another lure that's quite underrated is the Rapala X-Wrap. I think it's called the Long Cast. I think they're about 40 grams, and it's just a Rapala lure that's heavier, so you can cast it out there, and it dives to about 1.5 meters. And they work actually quite well, really well, especially for bonito. But yeah, they're very good too. So there's those, and then you've got that's your hard bodies, and then your plastics. I use 9-inch sluggos. Those slapsticks. They're great versatile lures. And then I've caught a lot on just your 60 gram metal raiders, lures that just a simple piece of shiny metal.
Yeah, metals are always good off. I think anywhere that's got some clean water, clear water, pelagic action, bait fish on the top. Very simple. Just got to wind in fast. Have a fast wind, and that's it. You're on. Pretty much.
I know a lot of the guys out there use also micro jigs, like 40 gram micro jigs, and cast out and then jig it back. I haven't had too much success on those, but if you've got them, I know guys use them and catch good kings on them. So
now I want to get more into that, but let's just circle back around. What sort of colors? Do you have any color preferences for the Maria lures? Or just in general, what sort of colors? I mean, it's probably impossible to remember exactly every single variation of pattern that you prefer.
Yeah, look, I like to keep it relatively simple. In the early morning, I like to use darker lures to give a better silhouette. So the kind of, I think they're like a soury color, which is like black and silver. And that just being that kind of darker color just looks a bit, not to me, but to the fish, I find that, having that silhouette can really sort of tempt a few kings to take it. And that's when it's like almost just on dawn, like you can just see. So I'll generally use that kind of color. If it's a bright sunny day, I'll use bright colors. So I think Rapala have like a Dorado color that I've used, and a few pinks and things like that, which work well. But at the end of the day, the two good colors I find that are very consistent is clear,
Yep.
and white.
Yep.
White works really well for kings. So yeah, darker colors in the dark, low light, bright colors in the bright sun. And if as long as you've got a white lure and a clear lure, you'll be doing all right.
Yeah, it sounds like if you just want a couple of colors, those two colors are your general purpose. You can count on those colors. There might be a color that might be a bit more suited depending on the conditions as it varies, but if you're not going to spec out and have every single base covered, then white's a safe choice. White and clear.
Yep, pretty much. And the whites work really well when it's cloudy.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, which gives you, they just work. I mean, some of them, if you've got one that has a UV sort of reflection, they work well in a cloudy as well. But yeah, the color's one thing, but also the action of the lure is the other thing. So, you don't need to be going out there. If you're going out there and buying some lures for kings, I'd be focusing on more on getting a better quality lure than I would be focusing on the color. Like it's like, for example, if you've got in the shop and there's a Maria and there's a, some kind of like poo brand, and the poo brand's white and the Maria's not white, you're better off getting the Maria, if that makes sense. So
yes.
Yeah,
I like that. I like how you explained that one there.
Yeah,
it makes total sense.
And
it's got to swim right. I mean, there's a lot of things that make the Maria lures one of the lures that you count on, and it's not just the color, of course.
Exactly. And
also,
and when there's someone,
carry on.
Yeah, so I was just went on that too. Like when someone sort of says, it swims straight out of the box. Not only does it swim straight out of the box, but that meaning also goes down to the terminals. And what I mean by that is like the hooks and the split rings and the construction of the lure. If you're fishing for kings, they go hard. And if you've hooked onto a kingfish and you've bought some poo brand, that hook might straighten. That that split ring might straighten. That even just the wire inside the lure might come out. All these different things can happen. But if you invest a little bit more money in like a brand like Maria or a brand like Rapala or those bits and pieces, you can be confident they'll work.
Makes sense. Yeah, you don't want the lure to just fracture in half on the hit up the surface.
Exactly, and it's happened before. So
it's happened to you.
Yeah. It's
tell me about that story.
Oh, it's the So I got what was it? It was a So when I get the I think they're Spaniards, the Raiders, the Raider lures. So when I got some of those, the hooks on them are they're not that great, but they look pretty strong, but they're not that great, as I found out. So I swap them over for single hooks. But yeah, back in the day I had one and I think I used it a few times and it had just a tiny speck of rust on it. And I kind of wiped it off and I was like, oh, it's fine, no worries. I cast it out, hooked a pretty big fish. I think it was either a king or a bonito. It was big. And lost it, brought it back. And I'm like, oh, I spat the hook. And I looked at the hook and I was like, there's no hook. It snapped in half. I was like, sweet, cool.
So it went straight through the split ring. It just exploded or something.
It's like, so like you've had the treble and you've got the barbs, the three barbs that come out, the three sort of shanks, the hooks that come out. Two of them had snapped off.
Oh, right. Okay, I get you.
So it just snapped it right off. And I was just like, and when things like that happen, it really annoys you.
Yes.
Because it's like, that's something I could have easily stopped. That's something, if I wasn't so lazy, I could have caught that fish,
Yeah.
It sucks. So,
what's your opinion about singles?
They just sit better in the mouth. So what I mean by that is that when you're using trebles, you've got to remember, especially when you're using a 60-gram metal or something like that, if a fish jumps, like in particular a salmon, or shakes its head, it's got 60 grams flicking up and about, which can really throw a hook out. And when you've got the trebles, sometimes the trebles will they'll swipe at it and it'll sit in the top of their mouth or sit in the bottom, and it just doesn't sit quite right. And when they shake their head, it can easily throw it. Whereas when you use a single, it sort of works similar to the kind of theory about circle hooks, whereas a fish
Yeah.
grabs it, it goes in the corner of the mouth. If a fish, say that's the lure, hits the lure and slides out and slides down it, that single hook's just going to get us straight into the corner of the mouth. Look, not all the time, but I found that not my hookup ratio, but my sort of landing fish is a bit more sort of successful using
Yeah.
singles rather than trebles.
Yeah, let's invent a new ratio here, the retaining ratio.
Yeah,
You
pretty
retain, once you
much.
hook up the fish, to retain or continue with that catch, the singles stay in a bit more, higher retaining ratio.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, we'll stick with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll
I
write
think-
it down in a book.
Yeah, I think people will say that for the trebles, like you said, you can hook them up in, say, 2 places in the mouth, right? 2 of the trebles are in. You'd be very lucky if all 3 are in.
Yeah,
Like, very lucky. It'll have to be like a very small fish that its mouth completely engulfed each side of the treble.
yeah.
Maybe it's a yakka. It probably won't be a kingfish that does that.
No.
But then just the fact that there's 2 opposing forces where the hook points are penetrated through, they've got something to push against. And I think that's the reason why things can go wrong. It's like if you're pushing against putty or some sort of soft material, you've got nowhere to push. It's not changing, it's absorbing all the pressure. The second you're pushing against the hard surface, too much pressure does something. It causes things to break. And so what breaks, it's the hook point. The hook point fractures.
Yep, 100%. And not only that too, it can destroy fish's mouths. Like, if you get some smaller fish you want to throw back and it's completely just mangled from a treble, you kind of like, you feel a little bit guilty.
Yeah.
Whereas a single, you can just pop it out.
Do you change it for the Marias as well? Do you change the hooks?
The Marias,
or they're fine to, I mean, you might just use them as is first, and then if they start rusting, just swap them for singles if you so choose.
I'm a fan of like with the sort of bigger stick baits, I don't I don't really worry too much about the singles, because half the time, like, you'll have one in its mouth and one in the side of its head or something. But yeah, like you said, if it starts to rust a bit, I'll replace it with singles rather than trebles.
Yeah. What's the best way to get the action out of lures like that?
It's a sweeping action. So once I've cast it, I'll let it sit there. Whether if it's a sinking or it's floating, I'll do a similar action. So I take up the slack, and then once the slack's taken up, I sweep my rod across a good maybe 3 meters or so. And having that sweeping action gives that lure a really good dart through the water, and it stops. If it's a stick bait, it'll sit there. But if it's a floating stick bait, it'll sort of pop up like this. I'll give it a pause for maybe a minute or so. If it's a sinking stick bait, I'll still let it pause for about a minute, but instead of sitting there, it'll actually flutter down. And I found that on the flutter, sometimes a fish will take it. So, bit of a sweeping action, similar to what they do for GTs or something like that.
Yeah. So actually, for a whole minute, you're saying?
Yeah.
Or you mean a few seconds?
Maybe. Okay. Look, I'm not going to lie. Sometimes
like for the suspending one, I can see for the floating one, I can understand you could leave it out there for 10, 15 seconds, and it feels like a whole minute.
Yeah, look, sometimes I leave it for a minute because I'm tired. Look, I'm not going to lie.
Yeah, good technique.
Yeah, it's just like, I'll just let it sit there. You never know. Catch my breath. So, yeah.
Have you ever had them hit it on the pause after a long period? Say you paused it for about 30 seconds of the whole minute.
Yeah. I haven't had Kings hit it on the pause. I have had Taylor hit it on the pause.
Taylor, yeah.
Yeah,
I was
big
about
Taylor
to suggest
and,
that.
Some big salmon. But yeah, Kings like it moving. They'll watch it on the pause. Yeah. The moment you start moving it, they'll have a go. Sometimes I've had one time I had it on the pause for like a minute, and the Maria was it a Maria? So anyway, it was just sitting up there like that, as a stick bait does, and it just sank down like really slowly.
Yeah.
I was sort of freaking out, like, what's going on? So I kind of lifted it, and it was a giant squid. Had taken it.
Really?
I was just
wow.
It just sort of like sucked it on, and then the float just slowly went down, and I was like, that's not right. And then as I sort of hooked it, I was like, oh, it must be seaweed or something. Got it in close, and I was like, that's a massive squid. I'll take that.
Wow.
So yeah,
Score.
that was a bit weird. Yeah, pretty much. So, but yeah, in terms of fish, yeah, sometimes they hit it, but most of the time, no, it's when it's moving.
Yeah. What about in terms of gear?
Yeah, again, it comes down to similar to what I mentioned before with the bait. Again, you don't need to spend a huge amount of money, because look, the reason I suggest with this kind of fishing, I kind of suggest to people if they're starting out in it to get a combo or get a setup that can do both. So, some of my friends and stuff who are getting into it, I suggest something like a Penn Prevail in about a 10 foot. I think they're rated to about 15 kilos.
Yeah, those
The
rods are
reason for that,
unbreakable.
yeah, exactly. And the reason for that is that you can chuck poppers or stick baits and handle kings, but then you can also use it live baiting, but you can also use it off the beach for sharks and Jews and things like that. So it's a very versatile rod. You can even use it for, drummer and stuff. So,
Yeah.
10 foot, again, you can stick with Penn just because they're cheap and they don't break. Like a Penn Battle 5 or 6,000.
Yeah.
That's about what, 200. You'd probably all up maybe 400 with line and all that sort of stuff. But you've got a rod combo that you can use for so many different things.
Yeah.
So yeah, anything that's you don't need it super lightweight, but graphite rods are the way to go just because they are a little bit lightweight and you're casting and all that kind of stuff. But the Penn rods too, they've got, I think that they're Fuji K series guides, tangle free, whatever, you can talk of that. But basically it's a good quality guide. It allows a good cast. Again, they're durable. If you drop it on the rock or something like that, you're not going to be popping it off or something like that. So, something that's heavy, like, durable. You don't want to be going too long. Like 12 foot's probably a bit too long for casting lures. Around that 9 to 10 foot. Dye would do some good ones. Penn do some good ones. That's probably where I'm leaning towards.
12 foot's just way too much. I think that's the beach rod class. I find that you can't get the tip speed. I don't know. Let's invent. I mean, that's that concept. I've invented. What was it? Forgot what it was already. That retaining ratio.
Retaining ratio. Yep.
Now we're talking about tip speed. Tip speed. Yeah, tip speed of the beach rod is just way too slow.
Yeah. It's clunky. You can't get action on. Yeah, like you said. But that being said, though, you can use them for spinning metals because you're not imparting much action, and you can get the distance. So if you were going to say if someone's listening and they've got like a 12-foot beach rod, you can chuck it out there and get some metals out there. But yeah, if you want to get into it with some better lures and proper action, 12 foot's a bit too long.
Yeah, that tip speed's too slow. I find that it's like it's almost an uncomfortable lob.
Yeah.
It's like when I'm lobbing, I want it to be a little bit faster, and I just fall short of that comfortable speed, and it feels like you're trying to throw a human into the water. It's just you just can't throw him far enough and hard enough.
Yeah. You're talking about fishing, right?
Yeah, that's right. Off the rocks.
Right. And that too. And then also like it's just clunky. If you're going to put some action into it and you're sweeping a lure across, your rod's just going to it just doesn't work. So yeah, stick with around 10 foot.
Yeah.
Better to go.
What's you've talked like a lot about, the rods and, such as the, the Penn Prevail, things like that. I think that's a rod that keeps coming up. The other week I had some experiences with that rod. I just tried to load it up on a wharf. We're actually trying to snap it, and we just couldn't do it.
No, it won't break.
It just couldn't be done. It just screamed out to me that, hey, this is the perfect shark rod.
Yeah. It's the only sort of criticism I have about the rod is that it doesn't have much give. And what I mean by that is if you do use that rod, someone's gone out there and, if you're going to use it off the beach, fishing for sharks and Jews and things like that, because they are so stiff and strong, when you're fighting a fish, especially in the ocean environment with waves crashing and things like that, they can throw hooks quite easily. So the way to counteract that is you have a longer shock leader and things like that. But if there was any criticism, now this is just splitting hairs, but that's the only thing wrong with them, is that they're too stiff. That's it.
Yeah.
But besides that, you could pull a truck out if you wanted to.
You can, pull Tasmania up to the mainland.
Pretty much. Like,
shout out to the Tasmanians. That was just a joke there.
Yeah.
Don't cancel me.
No, you'll lose one, two listeners. Who lives there anyway?
What do you think about like conditions? What sort of conditions are you looking for? Do you believe in? I mean, it sounds like you do. You do think about tides and conditions.
Yeah, look,
like I'll let you take it from here.
No, it's all right. No, it's more of a two-part kind of thing with conditions. So firstly, the conditions will provide the access to the location. If you're fishing a low tide area, obviously you need a low tide. Fishing a high tide area, you need a high tide kind of thing. And then swell direction and all that sort of stuff will determine where I go fishing, because you don't want to be fishing when there's big swell and things like that.
That's right. The best conditions might be the introduction to the end of your life, so you got to be careful.
Exactly. You always want to be extra prepared. Like, my friends and I, we fished the rocks for so many years and stuff like that, but we still don't take chances. Always wear your life jacket. Always wear rock fishing shoes, because you just can't predict what the ocean's going to do. Just like, like it's a sort of left sort of field example, like left, example is that when you see the weather report, sometimes they're wrong. And
sometimes.
Sometimes. Yeah. So think about how much money, how much equipment, how much time is spent on predicting the weather, and they don't get it right. So you can have all this knowledge and all this experience rock fishing, and you're not going to get it right 100%.
Yeah.
So, you've just got to be careful in that sense. So, but the beauty of this kind of fishing is that the calmer it is, the better it is.
Right.
When it comes to kings and things like that. So, they are a sight predator. So, when it is like similar to bonito and things like that, when the water's clear, relatively calm, sunny, etc., they're going to be feeding. So, it gives you that advantage, because you can head down there when it's nice. You can head down there when it's sunny, and you've got a chance of catching one. The clear, calmer conditions is what I'm looking for. And then the sort of finer conditions of swell direction, wind, tide will determine which location I go to. So, don't be shy to go when it's calm and nice. Don't listen to people saying you need it rough and stuff like that all the time, because that's when people get into danger. So,
Yeah, that's how they end up on. I always crack this joke about myself. Like, I don't want to end up on Channel 9 News being airlifted out of the water. Like that's how it happens. Yeah.
Look, I'll tell you a story about a mate of mine. Like, he's a... he wouldn't mind me telling it. He probably doesn't. He probably won't even listen. Would he? No, he might. He might. He's pretty into... Anyway, I'll stop. I digress. I haven't talked to him in a while. Anyway, so he's an avid rock fisherman, right? So he went fishing up the north coast. This is a few years ago now, and he just had a little stumble, right? And as he stumbled, he has got a heavy backpack on. Sorry, I'll rewind a bit. He went a bit of a shortcut way to get to the location, and he thought, this will be fine, etc. But when you've got a bit of loose ground, you've got a heavy backpack, you've got all your gear, it's very easy to stumble. And he had a little fall, rolled his ankle, and he's kind of slid down this little kind of bit of a rock face, and he's sort of, gone, oh, geez, what just happened? Looked around like, am I all good, all good? And as he's done that, he's looked at his ankle, it's snapped in half. He's got a bit of his ankle sticking out of his sock, and there's a red patch there, and he's just gone, nah, that's not good. So he had to get airlifted from that location to like Newcastle Hospital, and he spent a good 6 months in rehab just to be able to walk again. So like walk properly in long distances again. So, and he's been fishing for I don't know how many years. So it just takes one little thing like that to happen if you're just not paying attention, or the ocean and the land will really smack you up if you don't pay respects to it. So
Yeah.
yeah, that was it was an interesting story, that one, because he was like, we didn't know, he kind of disappeared for a few weeks, and we're like, where is he? What's he doing? And we called, and he's just like, oh, sorry, man, I've had a bit of trouble. And then we didn't really know the full extent of it until we got to his house to see him, and his mum told us the whole story, which was pretty funny, because she's like, oh, my little angel was in pain and I couldn't be there. I was like, this is great. But yeah, but at the end of the day, that's, just be careful.
Yeah, makes total sense. So would you head out to some of these spots, before the sun's come up, or you'd only head there? Okay.
Yeah, I'll head there before the sun comes up. I generally, for two reasons. You want to be on there as the sun comes up because it's good bite time, but also some of them gets pretty busy, so you want to be there before people get there and get your spot.
Fair enough.
Yeah. So good headlight, let you know to get there. Most of the rock shelves around Sydney are pretty tame.
Yep.
Like Curl and stuff like that, they're pretty easy to get to. So you don't really need to be worrying about breaking your ankle going a shortcut. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the idea of taking a shortcut, you see, a shortcut usually means there's an element of risk that you're trading for a shorter time to get to your destination.
Yeah.
Shortcut through the yard with the dogs, the shortcut, through across the farm.
Yep.
Across the electric
Exactly.
fence. I'm not,
Yep.
I never do that sort of thing, but I know a lot of people take shortcuts like that, and it sounds like obviously if it's a shortcut, there's inherent risk.
Yeah, speaking of shortcuts, just remind me when I was like, I think we were about 17. There's 16, I think. Well, yeah, I'm still at school. So there's a shortcut near where I live, and it's basically like, so there's a headland, and you can either walk around to get to a fishing spot and surf spot, or you just go through the headland and then climb down this rope, like this little goat track. And some of the oldest dudes were like, oh, yeah, there's a goat track at down this shortcut. Just go through this house and you're at the shortcut. It cuts off like 10, 15 minutes. And we're like, yeah, sweet. Okay, no worries. Let's give it a go. So we discovered it. We're like, this is amazing, man. Like, it cuts off so much time. We can surf before school and all this stuff. Anyway, we're doing it one day, and a police officer was at the goat track and yelled at us, and they were like, well, what's going on? And he's gone, oi, fellas, can you come here for a sec? And we thought, what have we done? Are we like, what do we do? So we're thinking, he's going to have a go at us for trespassing or something like that. So he pulls us up. There's about three of us, and he takes us out to the front of the house. And there's a police car there, and there's another police officer there, and we're just thinking, have we done something here? Like, what if and we're looking at each other going, what did you do? And he's like, well, what did you do? Anyway, so the police officer sat us down and basically said that the old man who lived in this house had passed away and had been there for like a month, and no one knew.
Yeah.
And because we were walking through it, we became a suspect.
Right.
And we're just like, nah, this isn't right. This is not good. But look, it was basically just for questioning. And the questions were, do you know this man? Have you ever gone inside? We're like, no. And they, let us go. But it was pretty scary at the time, because we were just like thinking that we were going to get, locked up for, trespassing this old man's house. But no, he just passed away from natural causes, but no one knew that he was passed away. So yeah, it was a bit of a crime scene. But so yeah, that's just a message out there. Sometimes shortcuts can get you into trouble.
That's right.
Yeah. So yeah.
What about other conditions such as barometer?
Oh man, I think about this a lot. I don't tend to worry about it. That's not really. I think the biggest factor is water quality. And what I mean by water quality is the clarity of the water. So when you're off the rocks, you've got, it's exposed to the elements. So you've got wind pushing stuff in. You can have red algae blooms. You can have cold water currents come through. You can have a lot of rain and runoff that dirties the water, which can really shut down the fishing. So yeah, for me, it's that water quality. In terms of barometer, to answer your question, yeah, I don't see the evidence in how it would work.
Yeah, I think it depends on the angler, but yeah, a lot of anglers are of that school of thought that, there may be an effect there, but it's just really, maybe the experiences don't match up to draw a definitive conclusion. But then there are others that say, if it's, I'll tell you what the most common sort of thinking is: high barometer is good, and if it's low, it's dropping quickly, which is a sign of a storm, and that's also good. So that's the two sort of, main, I guess, ideas when it comes to those believers of the barometer having a huge effect. And then you've got, a lot of other people that, like yourself, you haven't formulated, or your experiences just don't quite give you that definitive direction in how it affects anything at all. So it's quite normal, in other words.
Yeah, exactly. And I think at the end of the day, the factor of environmental factors have to affect the fish in a way that promotes feeding. So I know that, for example, when it's, if there's tide flow, that tidal flow brings food, the fish know this, so they start feeding. Whereas with barometer, I've seen some articles and stuff talk about how the barometer can affect the effect on the fish's swim bladder, which in turn tempts that fish to start feeding.
Yep.
Right. But then, they also, I've seen guys talk about it when they're catching sharks and things like that. And at the end of the day, sharks don't have a swim bladder. So it's kind of like, well, hang on. Then that theory gets thrown out the window. So I guess, in terms of a story, and when it comes to, I guess general rule of thumb kind of stories, like, like you said, high barometer promotes fishing, low barometer, when it's dropping, promotes fishing. So, when we were teenagers again, we used to catch beach worms, and we used to sell them as kids. We used to we'd spend all day in the school holidays catching them. We'd catch one or two. We'd go to a guy fishing at the beach and go, hey, you want to buy a worm? And he'd be like, yeah, for sure. Make $2 or something. And would, to tell you the truth, we were saving up for a naughty magazine. And, but every time we got to about $4 or $5, we're like, oh, let's buy lollies. So we never got to that dirty magazine. But we thought one day, my dad's like, why don't you use them fishing and catch fish and sell the fish? And we're like, hey, that's a good business idea. So we're like, let's start fishing for whiting. Yeah, let's start fishing for whiting. We didn't really know much how to do it. So we went down to the tackle shop, talked to the guy down there, and he said, mate, you can't catch whiting at night. They just don't feed. Yeah. And we were like, as teenagers, we thought, okay, he knows what he's doing. We don't know what we're doing. So we took it as like the gospel, like, let's never fish at night for whiting. And it took me about 5 or 6 years to go fishing at night with a mate, and we caught whiting. And we're like, hang on, old mate's just given us a bum steer. So for 5 or 6 years, I never went fishing for whiting at night because this old mate told me not to, when I've missed opportunities. So bring that back down to like barometer. Like, I can waffle on as much as I want about how it doesn't affect fish, but, don't take that for, as a Bible. Like, don't let that stop you, kind of thing. Still get out there and fish. If you think that the barometer's going to affect fish, mate, don't stop that. Don't let that stop you. Keep going. So from my perspective, I don't think it has any effect, but that doesn't mean it, it's true.
Yeah, very interesting story there. I wonder if that was some sort of common belief many years ago that you couldn't catch whiting at night. Was that even a thing? I've never heard of that theory.
Yeah. Look, I think at the end of the day, he just didn't want us fishing his spot. That's the way I see it.
Right.
He didn't want some kids just ruining his spot. I don't know, maybe, but yeah, he said, he was adamant. He was like, whiting don't bite at night.
Yeah.
And it's like, I think they do.
Yeah, I want to add to that thought about the air pressure, barometer, and how it affects the swim bladder. So we're talking, I think, I really got to get these units correct, but even if I don't get it correct, it doesn't matter. The message doesn't change.
Yeah.
So I think they report these as hectopascals or kilopascals or something.
Yeah.
Anyway, we're not changing the air pressure all that much.
No.
So, yeah, don't quote me on this, but I doubt we're changing it any more than about 5-10%. Probably even less than 5% on a low barometer day to a high barometer day. So what are we going from? 980 to 1,040? 10%, let's say. Say about 10% absolute max.
Yep.
Now, that's just air pressure, but once you go underwater, that pressure on the organs of the fish are just so much higher.
Yep.
Like, if you've ever tried to like dive in the water, you can literally feel the pressure build up straight away, just being in the water. So, I guess that's a counter argument to the effect of barometer having, an influence on the swim bladder, of a fish, because it is an effect, but it's probably such a minuscule effect that just being in the water, it totally dominates the fish's experience with pressure anyway.
Yeah, exactly. And to follow on from that too, like I mentioned before, like an effect in the environmental change needs to promote a feeding habit for fish to kind of really take effect to it. And sort of looking into it a bit deeper, that they've done a lot of studies on fireflies in the US, and the fireflies are affected by a drop in air pressure. Because they can feel that there's a storm coming, they start to kind of not panic, but they start to move around a bit because they want to, they're excitable, like, that kind of thing. And given, I'm assuming this theory may have come from the US, so let's just say, for argument's sake, it does, that, okay, drop in air pressure, fireflies start to buzz around the lakes, hit each other, hit trees, fall in the water, natural burley trail, the bass start feeding them. So it's kind of like a secondary effect with the, drop in, with the air pressure drop for the fish to feed. It's not directly affecting the fish, it's affecting the fireflies, which is affecting the fish to feed.
Yep.
Which makes sense.
Yep.
But to expand that to say, you're fishing in 40 meters of water, you're like, would they really feel that difference? Kind of thing. Yep. So, yeah.
Also, I don't want to conclusively say that I know the answer here. I don't. So let me just put a counter argument to the counter argument that I gave, about the barometer and the air pressure.
That's it. Yeah. Devil's up. Yeah.
Here's something to think about. How sea turtles can remember where they were born and they can swim millions of miles. Okay, true. I don't know if it's millions of miles, but they're in the open ocean, and then come 40 years later, or how many years, decades later, they come up to the age of spawn. They can navigate their way back to that patch of sand and lay eggs for the next generation. Or butterflies or birds that can apparently navigate through the air and know exactly when it is that they need to be back at the breeding grounds.
Yeah.
So there's just some things that maybe there's something that we just don't understand. I mean, I think there are some other things that influence that, such as maybe magnetic fields and all that stuff about the Earth, but we're getting a bit too deep there, and I don't have all the facts about that.
But it's totally true, though, because at the end of the day, us as a human species, we're useless when it comes to these senses of fear, of changes in barometer and stuff like that. So we have no idea, Dogs can smell fear. I can't. I can see if some guy looks scared, but I can't smell it. The pheromones and all that kind of stuff, like, who knows?
Yeah, birds can see in UV.
Exactly. Yeah, and the squid can see polarized light now, apparently. I was listening to, if there are any listeners out there who like podcasts, there's a podcast called In Our Time, which is a BBC podcast. They do a really good podcast on squid. It's a few years old now, but they've got basically like the top scientists from different universities in England, and they talk about squid, and it's next level.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you're interested, give a listen.
All right, Steve Collopy, thank you very much for the amazing, invigorating, stimulating conversation. So I hope you guys enjoyed this podcast. But before we head off, Steve, is there anyone that you'd like to thank or any sponsors or anyone that you'd like to give a shout out to, and also let people know how they can reach out to you.
Yeah, just you can search my name on Instagram, whatever. If you want to, ask me a message, ask me a question, whatever. More than happy to help. In terms of thanking anyone, yeah, I haven't really got anyone to thank. Really, I don't have any sponsors or anything. So no, just thankful that I can do what I can do.
Yeah, awesome. So his Instagram handle is Scallops, SCOLLOPS with an underscore. But, I'll put that link down in the description as well of the Spotify and also the podcast channel on YouTube. And yeah, I'm going to wrap this one up. Ladies and gents, so I'd like to extend an open invitation to anyone that has a lot of knowledge and wants to share it on a podcast here as well. So always open to, bringing on board interesting people that, just want to have a yarn, want to have a conversation just like this one. But anyway, I'll see you guys in the next podcast. This is Shroom for the Shroom Live podcast, signing out.